My name is Councillor Lucy Hodgson and I'm the chair of the committee. If the alarm sounds, the premise must be evacuated immediately. Do not spend time collecting personal belongings. All emergency escape routes are clearly signed. Once you have left the building, the assembly point is in the High Street opposite the Guildhall. This is a public meeting and the members of the public and press are permitted to report on the proceedings. Reporting includes filming, photography, making an audio recording and providing commentary on proceedings. Please note this meeting is recorded and streamed live. These recordings are published on the relevant meeting page of the Council's website. By choosing to attend this public meeting, you are deemed to have given your consent to being filmed or recorded and for any footage to be broadcast or published. Members and other speakers are reminded to use their microphones when speaking. So welcome to today's Place and Economic Subcommittee. Just before we start, David Blake has unfortunately been taken ill, so he won't be attending tonight. So any questions in the way of particularly performance and this sort of thing, perhaps if officers can't answer the questions, a written answer will be available. So appointment of substitutes.
We have Councillor Barnes for Councillor Gregson and Councillor Stephen Hodgson for Councillor Alan Amos. Thank you, Chair.
And declarations of interest. Simon?
Thanks, Chair. Just in relation to agenda item number 6, it mentions involvement of the County Council and the Local Enterprise Partnership. I'm obviously a member of the County Council, but also on the Local Enterprise Partnership Board. I've not had any detailed relations to this strategy in terms of discussion in the immediate vicinity for this this meeting. So I'll just declare as an interest but take part.
Thank you. Yes.
Could I give Pat Agar's apologies? We haven't actually heard from Pat as to why she isn't here, but I know she was poorly towards the end of last week. And, you know, Pat's been a councillor for so long, she doesn't just miss meetings.
No.
So could I give her apologies, please?
Certainly. Public participation, I think we have none. And minutes of the last meeting. So do we accept that these are true record and any matters arising? Councillor Barnes.
Thank you, Chair. It's really on an omission, really, because item 5 on last time's agenda was the Worcester City Cultural Strategy. Now, we heard at the end of last week, we decided not to be a city of culture or not to apply for it. It's not in these minutes. Could I be told where the minute is that we decided not to do it?
Well, we certainly didn't decide it here. We also, and I believe it was the leadership of the council that decided that we didn't put forward to it. It is, as we know from the previous time, a lot of money, a lot of
Yeah, I wonder whether
yes.
It's a fair question from Councillor Barnes, whether we just get a written answer.
Yeah.
Because obviously David isn't present, so that would seem sensible. Because it wasn't a matter that was discussed at the meeting. So I think Absolutely. The record stands as a true and accurate reflection, but a point of information we could find out.
But it certainly was a lot of information and everything when we went for it last time. So
I would be grateful for an answer because obviously a decision was made somewhere and I'd like to know where it was. Thank you.
Yes, and though I haven't, though I don't want to, and also the exempt minutes, do we agree that they're a true record? Right. So, performance report. How do we want to lead this? Because I think recommendations that we note them, and we perhaps ask questions about various things. Yep.
I would suggest that we just go through them and make a list of questions,
Yep.
and then when the managing director is able to answer, we all get sent the answers.
So, any questions? I suppose I've got one question, and that's over the review of the South Worcestershire Development Plan review, and as of last week, it was on hold, and I think we've probably delayed it for about 3 to 6 months. But perhaps we could have a quick just a detail on that. Any other questions? Councillor Barnes.
Thank you, Chair. First of all, on the city centre master plan, when are we going to be receiving an update on that? Because obviously it was due 31st of March 2020. So I wonder when we'll actually get an update on that. And then quite a lot on the planning applications. And I suspect it's due to staffing as well as COVID. But could there be a bit of clarity as to what's going wrong on that? Because it's clear that there have been some temporary problems. On the appeals on the major planning applications, it goes up to 100%. Presumably that's just one application that went through at that time, so it's either 1 or 0. And just want confirmation on that one. And then on the key sector SME supported to recruit, the amount going down from 43 in 13-14 to 7 this year. Is it a lack of ambition or is it purely due to COVID? Sorry? Okay. Shall I rattle off the rest? And then it's just a comment really on the city centre footfall is down by 44%, and the admissions and commercial income from city museums is down 58%. And how are we going to try and turn those around?
In terms of the skills performance, if you go back to year 13-14, then I'm not quite sure what the target was set or how it was set. I wasn't around them, but it would definitely be a different intervention. So you can't really compare like to like on the trajectory. But since 2017, since we had the strategy, the target and the skills enabling budget together, we've set targets really on the graduate grants. It was very much setting out an expected demand. That demand hasn't really been exactly what we had expected, and that as I'll cover later in my report, that was something that we looked at through an independent evaluation. And really the issue with SMEs needing higher level skills and graduates isn't really about availability or that they can't afford them and need a subsidy, so much as the kind of skills that they need are in short supply nationally. With the apprenticeship grants, we've mostly met our targets, I believe. I think, you know, perhaps at the very beginning we'd set out our targets around how much money we were allocating to apprenticeship grants, but we've since changed that so that there's a stepped gradient of grants availability. So if, for example, we'd set a budget of 20k for the year, we'd say we're going to support 20 SMEs, but we might have supported more or less than that because they may have come back for more, they may have taken more than £1,000 grants. So, and I know it can look as though the grant schemes are not working. Certainly in the apprenticeship grants have worked. The graduate grants were not really in as demand as much as we'd expected, and that's subject of the review that I'll be talking about later today.
So your question was, Councillor Barnes, am I correct? You were pinpointing that admissions to the museums were lower than the city footfall overall. I'm going to talk about that in a little bit more detail when we talk through the annual report. So if you're happy, I will come back to that question because I think there's a kind of a wider context that it's worth us talking about together. Income, though, let's talk about that specifically. So obviously at the moment we're looking at Q1. For Q1, the government's income loss compensation scheme still exists for local authorities. So we will be compensated for that at a rate of 75% of loss. So we're prepared for Q1 position already. We are in a position where we are carefully monitoring onwards, which we're obviously now into the onwards. At the moment, I am projecting that we will make a loss against our targets, but not one that we cannot make back by the savings that we currently have in place. So we've kept some posts vacant and we have brought in additional external funding in order to be able to cover that gap. So at the moment, I am confident that we are able to meet that gap, but we are in a lucky position that we were able to put a surplus into the museum reserves at the end of last financial year, and that is available, if JMC, Joint Museums Committee, are happy to do so, to enable us to put that towards any deficit that we make this year.
And the Fringe Festival and all things like that, really, I think we really have been seeing a real upturn. And I think it's nationally that we've seen the dramatic decline. But year in year, I think we'll be all right. And also, this committee has seen that the tourism, Helen Mole and her team have been really great on things about tourism and that sort of thing. So I think this is good. Any other questions? Pat?
To everyone, of course. I suppose I can sort of back up your words, I think, on the matter of the museums before I ask my question. Obviously, you are looking at urgently at other ways of increasing funding as well, and those look quite hopeful, don't they? So, you know, I don't think anyone is standing idly by while all this happens. So, my compliments on your initiatives, really. The question that I'd like to ask is on page 5, and it's about the archaeology reports that are late or not completed, should I say. According to this report, I wondered if they'd been completed since the report was written, because James Dean, our archaeologist, has left us. Yes.
Written response. I think that's probably rather than, again, Margaret can list them. Okay, thank you. Any other? Okay. So we then go on to employment and skills strategy.
Thank you, Chair. So just I think it's quick recap for the benefit of new members, also because I haven't come to the committee since October 2019 to update on skills. The City Council has had an employment skills strategy in place since 2016. We're currently in the 2018 to 2021 strategy cycle. Effectively, we should have been launching a refreshed strategy for the period 2021 to 2024 this month, but for reasons set out in the report, this work has been delayed. So what I'll be doing today is updating on where we've got to with the refresh. The strategy articulates how we plan to deliver against city plan priorities, but within the context of the county-wide strategies and programmes, particularly those managed under the umbrella of the Worcestershire Local Enterprise Partnerships Employment and Skills Board and County Council. So strategies such as the Strategic Economic Plan, the Children and Young People's Plan for the county, the county's Open Business Strategy are all the sort of strategic framework that we set our city strategy within. So as such, it's a partnership document, and it brings together the shared priorities for all of the partners into a single document, so we have a coherent vision as it relates to the needs of Worcester. And as such, the refresh will need to be conducted in partnership and aligned to the wider strategic context as it evolves and is still evolving. The skills enabling budget, the City Council has allocated a skills enabling budget since 2013 from its new homes bonus funding. That funding stream has now come to an end. Since 2017, we've used the skills enabling budget to directly support delivery of the skills strategy through budgeted annual delivery plans. And reports have come back to this committee every 6 months since then. As I said, the last update to the committee was in October 2019. And at that meeting, the committee agreed to receive an evidence-based draft of a refreshed skills strategy for 21-20 to 24 and recommendations for the future direction of delivering the strategy. This work would be informed by an independent evaluation of the 2017-2020 programme, and it was agreed that report would come back to the committee in October 2020. So we're a little bit late, but I wanted to sort of set out today where we've got to in terms of the work that's been completed, what the plan is to complete that work, and what we'll be doing, or what the priorities are for the remainder of this year, which we see very much as a transitional year. So the strategy has 4 priorities at the moment: partnership working, which is crucial to everything we do, as I've just explained. Connecting schools and business, which is preparing young people, students, residents in our educational institutions to become the future employers and employees that will drive the economic growth. Skills for growth, which is about supporting the growth of our SMEs in key sector through their workforce skills and through their business leadership skills. And inclusive growth, which is about removing barriers to the labour market for those who are most furthest away from work, or driving up skills levels in the resident population. So to update on what preliminary work has taken place over the past, I say a year, but it's probably a bit more than a year, obviously with the pandemic since came into being in March 2020, the economic development team have been focused on supporting our businesses, our residents and our community partners to deal with the impact. But we have conducted an independent review, which took place last summer, which is on the skills enabling budget programme and as it delivered the strategy. There is a very long, lengthy report, which is a background paper, which I can circulate. But in summary, the independent evaluation, the aim of the evaluation was to test how well the programme had impacted on strategic priorities and achieved value for money. We asked them to make recommendations on how the council could mature its approach to delivering the skills strategy. The evaluation found that the programme had achieved clear and quantifiable outputs for city businesses and residents, which represented value for money. However, there was less evidence on how well the delivery programme had been able to influence improvements on the strategy's key performance indicators. So things like the apprenticeship grants, as we were just discussing, council bonds, take up by businesses, very much a valued scheme by our businesses, doesn't necessarily translate into more businesses, sort of more higher apprenticeship numbers, for example, because there are so many other factors at play within that strategic sort of global context. Other structural issues like, as we were discussing about graduate recruitment, you know, there's an ageing demographic in the city and across the country. We feel it here in the county. It's always a challenge to keep young people and young graduates in the city and in the county, or to get them back here after they've gone off to university. And also the business demand for skills, as we've all seen over the last 18 months, you know, the pace of technological change and the demand for technical skills is outstripping supply. So those are some of the structural issues that we have to try to tackle and work with our partners at the left in the county. So it can't always be addressed by our small skills enabling budget, but it's there to support our local residents and businesses. The evaluation therefore concluded that the council had a really strong partnership ethos, and this is what had enabled us to get better leverage of mainstream county-wide resources in the city and working with our key partners. And the skills enabling budget was most effective where we had the partnership intelligence to see where there were gaps and where we could add value to the mainstream provision provided by funding streams such as DWP and the ESF delivery, or the Careers and Enterprise, the CEC company programme that's delivered across Worcestershire schools through the county and the provision. You know, as an example, our local discretionary funding partnered with our county and LEP programmes led to something like over 9,000 students having meaningful interactions with local employers and receiving careers guidance over that 3-year period. As I say, there's a comprehensive report in the evaluation which sets out the achievements of the programme year by year, project by project, which I can circulate to members. And of course, we've delivered, obviously at a slower pace, but we have continued to deliver over the last 12 months as well. So this year, the council skills enabling budget winds down. So we're part of the strategy review. We'll be looking at the recommendations from the independent evaluation as they relate to the changing context as we move forward. And we'll be renewing our focus on our partnership approach, just working with our partners, see how we can leverage new and existing funding to address the city's priorities. And we'll also be looking at how we can, as a City Council, can maximise social value from our own spend programme. So all of the recommendations and the stakeholder consultations that were part of the independent evaluation project last summer will be fed into the forthcoming strategy review. There's also obviously been a changing context since we first set out to plan the strategy review, not least the COVID-19 pandemic. So economic recovery is now a key priority, and there's positive signs that that's underway. We have a Worcestershire economic recovery plan, which will be fed into the skills review. More positively and excitingly, the City Council has been successful in securing 17.9 million investment from Future High Streets Fund, 19.6 million from the Towns Fund, plus over 25 million match funding to deliver the Worcester Town investment plan. So together with the £4 million Arches project currently underway, we've now got a £65 million regeneration programme ahead of us, where we can create new jobs and training opportunities across a range of sectors, including construction, creative industries, health and digital services. And the town investment plan particularly includes proposals to develop a network of learning and enterprise hubs across the city to help embed a culture of lifelong learning and entrepreneurship that will drive that recovery and long-term economic growth. There's also been a wide range of changes in national policy. Some of it was already in the planning, some of it is a response to the pandemic, but all of that will be fed into the strategic context in terms of the Employment Skills Board plan, who've just released a new local skills plan, which sets out a new and refreshed strategic framework within which we will be delivering our city strategy. That county-wide plan addresses three key challenges. The demographics of the county and the city, so we'll be working with employers to adapt to the reality that we have an ageing workforce and ageing population. Whilst we still want to attract and retain young people in the county, that's both through promoting the county and the city as a place for young talented people to work and to set up business, as well as careers advice linked to our actual business growth sectors. A skilled workforce, again, that's already a current priority. So it's working with our employers, using an intelligence-led approach to look at training provision in the county to support businesses to upskill and reskill their workforce and themselves for the future economy. And of course, COVID recovery, which will be a golden thread through all of the work that we will do. So the preparation of the refreshed employment skills strategy will need to incorporate also council strategies. The city plan has been refreshed this year, so we'll be working with the team on that to ensure the skills strategy is reflecting those priorities. As I've said, the Worcester Town investment plan, city centre master plan, the county's economic recovery plan and the city's community recovery plan, and of course the Worcester tourism strategy. We'll also be taking into account the council's partnership and approach to issues around environmental sustainability, children, young people, child poverty, housing and homelessness. So the review will be taking place immediately. There has been quite a lot of background work done, and we have a draft a consultation paper for internal review ready to go after this meeting if committee approve the preferred option at number 3, paragraph 3, sorry. So as of tomorrow, we can start to look at reviewing the priorities and conducting internal consultation. We'll also need to align the strategy with the town fund business case, which is a piece of work that's underway at the moment, and also that schedule. By October, we'll have a first draft and we'll be going out to our key stakeholders and partners to comment. We'll then have some review with the final draft and final consultations taking place between January and March. So we'll be planning to bring back a final draft to committee around March or whenever the meeting takes place, scheduled around then, ready for launch from April next financial year. So for that work will be ongoing this year, obviously. We don't have an annual delivery plan this year as such, but the priorities for the remainder of the year will be continuing to support the Worcestershire Economic Recovery Plan, the employment and skills elements, including the DWP Youth Hub, which will be opening at the Hive from September this year. Which is a very big project for all of us to make sure that's successful for our young people. As I said, supporting the development of the business case for the town investment plan, particularly around the project for community skills and enterprise, and particularly with regard to working with partners to try to secure some match revenue funding for delivery of that project. We'll also be looking at renewing our focus on how we extract economic benefits, both from our development through the planning system, but crucially through the council's capital programmes, such as the Future High Streets Improvement Scheme, which I believe is on the agenda later. And I will continue to deliver the Skills Enabling funded programme. As I say, we're now winding that programme down. The budget this year is £20,000, although some projects were front forward funded last year. So we do have other projects already running this year. I've set out their expected outputs from the programme. So that's the recommendation to the committee, an update on the work that we've completed, and we're looking for the committee to agree to the review schedule and to give us the green light to carry on that and bring the strategy back to you at the end of this year.
Right. Joe and then Jenny.
It's not so much a question as a comment about the vital work that the skills strategy is doing, because I think one other bad thing about the 16 months that we've had of this pandemic is that it's exacerbated the difference between skill levels in the city. And there are some parts of the city where skill levels and educational achievement is very low. And we do need to do everything that we can in this strategy to try to address that and to make sure that we're producing young people who have the skills that employers want and need for this city, for the furtherance of this city and the economic growth and good of the city. So it is vital here, I think, that that this strategy continues and is successful. I do feel that that really that we are approaching a point in time where we're going to have some young people in the city who will be discarded unless we can deliver, unless we can give them the skills that they need. And we do have the opportunity in the money that we've secured from the government and our town investment plan to skill young people up to produce the things that we hope to deliver through that plan and through the money that we have to improve the Angel Street area and to improve the northern quarter of the city. And I hope that that many young people in the city will be skilled, not only young people, older people as well, will be skilled to be able to deliver the hopes and aspirations that we have for that money to be spent. So I welcome this strategy, and I do hope that it's successful in the economic growth of the city, but also the upskilling of people who live in the city to deliver what is needed.
Thank you, Chair. It's just a question about the DWP Youth Hub. I wondered what it is, what it does, and how we engage with it, please.
Okay, so youth hubs are part of the government's response through Plan for Jobs, and it's delivered through DWP in recognition, as Councillor Hodges alluded to, about the impact specifically for young people. So we've had, last summer we had a cohort of young people leaving education into a basically empty labour market, and more young people leaving education this year into a recovering but still weak labour market. And also the issues around mental health for young people. Young people during the independent evaluation, there was a stakeholder consultation with all the partners we worked with and delivery partners, strategic partners, and overwhelmingly concern about young people and youth unemployment was a key concern. So the Youth Hub is part of the national response to COVID and the impact for young people. The hub will actually be based at Hyde. There's space that's been allocated there, and it'll be used by Job Centre Plus advisors and work coaches to meet with the 16 to 24-year-old age group clients. But there'll also be other providers there. So the idea is that a young person will go to see their job centre, their JCP coach, to talk about their prospects, but instead of having to sort of go home and then maybe go somewhere else to go and see someone about their mental health issues or their housing issues or a training course they might want to do, the idea is that all of those services will be co-located, and that will be a hub for young people. They can pop in and those services will be there, not just on the day that they have advisors. We're also looking at satellite offices in some of the community centres. So the hub is a physical space, but it's also a concept of a co-located integrated service for young people, centred around employment, but looking at their issues holistically, and then being able to go to them if necessary. So we're looking at having some time with those providers in Trinity Street in the Housing Options Office, and at some of the community centres as well. It's very much going to be responsive as to where the need is and the demand is, and we're working very closely with the county and DWP, Young Solutions, and many other people who want to engage to come together to support young people in the city. I should say also the hub will be, the Worcester is the pilot, and at first it'll be the only one in the county, but there are plans to open another hub in Kidderminster and Redditch later on this year.
Following on from that, you mentioned that youth centres were in the mix. What about local libraries? We've got 2 local libraries in Worcester.
Yeah, well, of course, the Hive is a library. The reason that they've selected the Hive is that it's central at the moment for all young people, easy to get to. Of course, the county are very involved in this, and I'm sure that they already do use adult learning centres and libraries for job seeking for JCP coaches. So, as I say, it's not just a physical space; it's a way of working and being able to bring services, holistic services, to young people in spaces where we can meet them, or where service providers can meet them. And that's sometimes about what the young person's preferences and what their needs are.
Thanks very much, Lucy. I think that the thing that I'm trying to sort of get a sense of is if we get our skills training in broad alignment with the rejuvenation of the local economy, and the report draws our attention to that, looking further forward, how do we secure the funding that is ultimately necessary to put a highly skilled local economy actually as a driver for bringing people and employers and investors into the city? Because yeah, I mean, clearly we have to react to people wanting to come to the city, and to make sure that the local workforce, particularly the young sort of demographic, have the necessary skills. But thinking more strategically further forward, how do we actually secure the funding that means that we can actually have a more long-term view of skills? Yeah, because it seems perfectly reasonably that we're looking to emerge from COVID, and I understand that, but looking more strategically, how do we actually broaden our thinking?
That's very much the job of the local enterprise partnerships employment skills board, who are also act now as have a statutory role as a local skills panel. Am I right? I think in that terminology. And part of that, their role as the local skills panel is implementing the local industrial strategy. So it could be, as I said, when we're talking about an intelligence-led approach to what employers need now and in the future. There is work going on at that level And there's been quite a lot of surveys and other analysis going on that's fed into the local industrial strategy to determine what the skills needed for the future, what training provision will be needed, and where that funding will come from. And that's a kind of conversation between the county, the left and government, really, in terms of the SFA funding and things like that, which will fund the colleges to be able to develop their curriculum. At the local level, we're able to work with the county and the left on that, so that where there are gaps, for example, you know, if it's, for example, a good example is things like the building block at the community trust. We know that the building block can fill some of those skills needs in providing short courses to get people onto, you know, skilled enough to get on site to do local labour and get into the construction industry. So there is sort of that agile. We're poised and working with partners about being able to respond to some of those issues, but the strategic long-term vision very much is the work of the Employment Skills Board.
Thank you, Chair. I think there was an aspect to Councillor Barnes's question which I'd like to pick up, which is the aspect of engagement of young people. I used to work for a national charity working with young people for quite a number of years. And one thing that strikes me about this youth hub business is that often the young people you need to reach are some of the harder ones to reach, which means that you actually have to make the move to reach out to them, because they're not necessarily going to come to you. So you have to develop that trust and develop young people friendly spaces that they will come to and will engage with you in those spaces. So I'm wondering quite how you are going to do that, because often these are young people who probably haven't been that comfortable in school or something like that.
Yes, so the county has a fantastic organisation called Young Solutions, and they run a programme. I mean, they're an umbrella organisation for all the youth voluntary services. And they're linked in with community and voluntary and grassroots organisations across the county, and help to capacity build and support those organisations. They run a specific programme called Seek and Reach, which we actually fund, called Seek and Reach. Yeah, we actually funded it for a year. It has been funded by European social funding. There was a sort of a gap, a hiatus between funding cycles when we funded it through our skills enabling budget, and that was able to also bump up activity in the city. They have the intelligence, they know where these young people are. It's very much working with those young people who, as you say, are hardest to reach, are harder to help, who have multiple problems, and they literally have a worker a key worker who will go, you know, to their house, obviously with parents' permission, and work with them very slowly at their own pace to sort of bring them along the path to, obviously there's an employment focus at the end of it, but you have to help people break down their other barriers, whether it's confidence or other issues, for them in order to be able to move along that path. So they have a very robust plan how they help young people, those sorts of young people, to move along the journey that they've set out, and they work with them. It can sometimes be 2 steps forward and 1 step back, but that's the kind of level of intense work that some young people need. It's currently now funded again by the European Social Fund. In terms of funding, you know, we're all working together to look at what the next funding opportunities are after European funding ends. So we look at our eye on UK shared prosperity. There's been bids have gone into the Community Renewal Fund, which is kind of a pilot for the next 6 months. And I know Young Solutions are working with Community Trust and Bestie Housing in Kidderminster to be able to pilot new programmes for working with young people, and again going back to that integrated holistic way of working in terms of not just employment but housing, mental health and all the other issues that young people need to address. I don't know if that's answered your question, but we work with,
I think it's
yeah.
got a long way towards it, yes. I mean, a number of us around the table are educational specialists as well. So this is something that I think we know quite a lot about. But I mean, I've heard of Young Solutions before. It'd be nice if we could actually get up close and personal and try and find out how it's really working on the ground sometimes. I don't know if there'd be an opportunity for that.
I can certainly send you, circulate the report from the Young Solutions project when we funded them for that year, and there's some case studies in there so you can see how they work and some of the achievements they have got, and I can put you in touch with, send you the website and put you in touch with the chief exec, Pete Sugg. I'm sure he'll be happy to talk to any of you anytime about what they're doing. Yeah.
This is 3 parts. So we note the progress to date on the review of the skill employment and skills strategy. We approve the revised timetable to complete the employment and skills strategy review with a 2022 to 2025 strategy in place for April 2022, and note delivery priorities of the remainder of 2021 to 2022 as a transitional year aligning for economic recovery. So is everyone in favour? No, thank you. So we now want to come and do museums.
Thank you, Chair. For those of you who aren't familiar with museums, my name is Philippa, I'm the museums manager, and the Museums Worcestershire is a joint museum service between the Worcester City Council and Worcestershire County Council, and it's been hosted by the City Council now since 2018. And I would say very successfully, actually, now as a city hosted service, not that it wasn't successful as a county hosted service. At the city, it's overseen by a joint museums committee, which is made up of members from the City Council and the County Council. The 2 city members are represented here tonight. It officially feeds into the Communities Committee here at the city. And I presented the annual report to them last week, and thank you to Councillor Stanley and Carver for listening to me again this time round. I'm going to cover report highlights that are probably more relevant to this committee this time, so it might be a slightly different focus to our conversation with communities last week. So I can talk specifically about the economic development impacts and a little bit about the wider heritage context, which comes back to what Councillor Barnes was asking me about earlier, I think. So, part of the museum's agreement as part of our joint authority is that we create an annual report, which gives actually an excellent opportunity to look back at the work that we've achieved over the last 12 months. This year, obviously, that's been a very different position to normal, and it has been a challenging year, without doubt, for both us and for everybody else. But I think it's also been a time when we've really shown that Worcester's needed the positive qualities that cultural life brings. And some of that we get a chance to talk about as we go through the report. I'm really happy to take questions on any of the elements of the report that I don't talk about. I'm not going to go through every page by page with you, but please do feel free to ask me if you have any questions. So if you would mind, if we start at page 31 of the reports pack. So that's a page entitled Our Museums and has a lovely picture of one of the team with their thumbs up on it. So I wanted to say, first of all, that I'm very proud that we were able to open the museums for the maximum number of days that we were legally allowed. This was not the case for the majority of museums in the UK, and in total that came to less than 5 of the 12 months in 2021. Museums, interestingly, were allowed to open less than many other organisations, including tattoo parlours and bars, and I think only nightclubs had it worse than museums, interestingly, for many reasons that I think we struggled hard to understand why, but it meant that really we had to think in new ways about, if we couldn't open our doors, how could it that we could still do what it was that we're there to do. And this is what I've got the opportunity to talk to you about in a little bit more detail. But I'll start off with the museums as we were able to open them. So on average, across the museums as a whole, we had 48% of average visitors, or normal visitors in a normal year. And I will go into a little bit more detail about each museum and what that meant. This is higher than many museums were across the country. Even the ones that were able to open were not in a position to be open for as long as we were, or with such normal operations as we were able to manage. So I think it's worthwhile noting that Worcester's museums had higher visitorships in 2020 than the Royal Armouries did, or the National Media Museum. So really significant museums that were not able to perform as well as we did. So on average, the national museums averaged about 18% of visitors returning. So we were quite significantly higher than that. But I do think it is worthwhile pointing out that point that Councillor Barnes mentioned earlier, really, that Worcester's high street footfall was in the low 70% of normal times, but that Worcester's heritage venues were hit considerably harder than that. So there's a group of the heritage organisations in Worcester called the Worcester Heritage Partnership, which support each other on making sure that we are able to do joint up initiatives, to do campaigning, advertising as an organisation together, so that we bring people into Worcester to see the great heritage that we have. And on average across those, the other museums organisations in total, we were looking at about a 30% return, average return over the summer of 2020. And I will come back to a little bit more in detail about how we supported those other museums, but I do think it's worthwhile knowing what the overall context of that is. So every month, an organisation that we're part of, the Audience Agency, have been doing a thing called a cultural participation monitor, where they do some surveys of visitors or cultural participants across the country. Interestingly, the June results were remarkably similar to the February results. So we're still at a point where people are still feeling quite unconfident about coming back to museums. Or coming back to cultural organisations. That includes things like theatres as well as museums. So at the moment, we're in a position where only 29% of our previous visitors feel happy to attend. So I do think it's really interesting that while we are in a position where the majority of the population is now double vaccinated, we do still have a significant worry from our residents that there is this concern about they may become ill and they don't want to visit places because of that. There are some other positive things that come out of it, which this survey is quite interesting. It suggests that more people are likely to come to their local museums rather than potentially travel further. More of them are likely to want to participate digitally with their local museums rather than necessarily come in person. But also, interestingly, one of the interesting things I felt quite interesting was that 36% of people felt they were more lonely than they had been before COVID, and that 79% of those people felt that visiting heritage attractions improve that sense of loneliness. So you can feel there is that sense of quality of life that can improve by visiting museums. Talking to some of the other bits about economic development, not necessarily about the people, but about the cold hard cash. We also do a standard methodology year on year about how museums estimate secondary spend. So this is based on a standard methodology that museums across the country use, which works out an approximation of what the expectation is that someone who comes to visit the museum would then spend within the local economy. And it's based on how far they've travelled and therefore what other things they're likely to need during their visit. And I do think it's worthwhile pointing out that even though we were only open for 5 of the 12 months in the year, and we only managed to get 48% of our average visitors back, we still brought in nearly £500,000 of additional secondary spend into the city. So I think it does show that cultural organisations do have a very important place within that wider environment of what's going on in the city. So I'm going to talk a little bit then about each individual city museum. So the Commandery, which I'm sure many of you will know, is our historic site in Worcester, the site of the Civil War Royalist headquarters and a key story for the Worcester's history. We were at a point through most of 2020 attracting about 64% of our average visitors at the Commandery from where we would be. And interestingly, anecdotally, we were reporting about 60% of visitors visiting from outside the city. So I think we were definitely in a position where staycations was really happening in Worcester last summer. Within the museums, we were able to participate in several national and regional campaigns that promoting the staycations, bringing visitors to the city and county. One of them was Visit England's Escape the Everyday campaign. And then there was also a regional staycation campaign that particularly worked with B&Bs, hotels, caravans, holiday homes, etc. in Worcestershire. There's a lovely picture of you on there, Gerald. Just sorry that she only just spotted that. But thank you for being one of our visitors during that day. The Worcester Art Gallery Museum has this slogan or value, I suppose, about bringing great art to your doorstep. Worcester, for those of you who don't know, Worcester Art Gallery Museum is the only museum in Worcestershire that's able to accept loans from national collections due to its security and its environmental conditions. And as a result, we really make, I would say, an important contribution to people being able to discover things within Worcestershire rather than necessarily feeling like they need to travel to London or to Birmingham or to Manchester or other large urban areas. And I think perhaps we've particularly seen the value of that at a time when people felt less confident about making travelling arrangements. So initially we were at 47% of our normal returns in 2020, but the autumn exhibition, the printed line, which brought some very important artworks from Picasso, from Bridget Riley, some really big name artists into the autumn here in Worcester, was particularly successful, and we saw our October half-term 20 numbers a bigger number than we would normally get in a normal year of October half-term. And I'm also very pleased to say that while our numbers were fewer than the city footfall, actually our shop had income of very similar to the city footfall, so around the 72% of by Christmas time. And I think again that reflects the fact that local people wanted to support local organisations, and we could feel that we were part of that community really, that opportunity to buy on your doorstep. If I can take you on to page 37 of the report pack, which is headed supporting our communities, and then talks a little bit about how we supported both the creative community and the heritage community here in the county. One of the things that I was very pleased that we were able to achieve was we were able to bring in really quite a lot of external funding from several different grant funders who had emergency fund streams over this last year. And as well as a little bit that we used to, which I'll talk about in more detail, used to talk about our own organisation. We also use that to support the organisations and the networks around us, which I think are crucial to meaning that cultural life continues in its widest format. So we were able to get funding from the Arts Council to support the local creative economy, and this literally gave money to creative people, both commissioning artwork from them and enabling them to work with other organisations to spread that cultural or that creative activities, which was I think very important during lockdown period. And I think it's nice that the Seven Arts has continued doing work very much along that line, also supported by the City Council. And Worcester Live have very recently launched their project WR1, which again is supporting local cultural emerging creatives to make sure that they stay within the area and that cultural economy remains an important part of what it is that Worcester does. And then I did talk a little bit earlier about the fact that the heritage community found things particularly difficult at times, potentially found it harder to bounce back than some retail and hospitality. I think one of the things that we have to recognise is that a lot of the smaller heritage organisations in Worcestershire are volunteer run or very dependent on volunteers. And for organisations that were in that position, dealing with the whole risk of reopening and working during COVID conditions is very difficult. And for many, it was a position where they just felt it was too difficult to be able to tackle. And so we were very pleased to be able to bring in this money from Historic England to support organisations like that in partnership with the Worcestershire Archives and Archaeology Department. And that was some very practical things, giving them some advice, but also the opportunity to share our own learning. So, for example, to share risk assessments and things like that, so that they could, literally learn exactly how we were doing it, so that they could take that on. And the information that we've collected as part of that has gone back to Historic England. So that should shape their longer term planning on grant funding. So that will be a positive thing, that they will hopefully create a position where smaller organisations they're now more informed about what those smaller organisations actually need as far as funding goes to maintain long term. I wanted to talk very, very quickly about our volunteers scheme. Volunteers are just as important to us, even though we have a good paid staff within the Museums Worcestershire. Volunteers are very much part of what we do. Again, volunteers have been a challenge during the pandemic. There is no doubt about that. But the interesting thing is it has really unleashed a desire to support your local community from our local residents, and so it's that interesting balance of how do you make sure we keep that going, make sure that people can work safely by doing it. We were very pleased to be able to get some funding to put together a whole system and infrastructure that enabled people to be able to work with our collections back in their own home. This is something that's quite groundbreaking in museums. We tend to be quite protective, but that's our job, nurturing, protecting the collections that have been put together over hundreds of years. And as a result, we tend to be often quite disinclined to enable things to go outside the museum into normal domestic environments. But we found new ways that we were able to achieve that, and that visitors would, that volunteers would be able to participate in projects working from their own home. And we found significant benefits to the volunteers themselves, but actually also to us to maintain work going on. And I'm really pleased that the number of hours that were donated by volunteers to Museums Worcestershire in 2021 was almost exactly the same as it had been the previous year. So we'd really managed to make it work. That infrastructure that we set up has been shared nationally and is being adopted now by some other organisations across the country, the London Archives being the first organisation to do so. So now let me take you to page 40, which talks to you a little bit about the museum team. I mean, really, the team were essential to making this work. I really want to say how fantastic the museum team are, and their ability to be able to work flexibly and transform rapidly has really made this happen, but I think will make things happen forward into the future as well. So we've really learned new ways of doing things over this last year. We were able to bring in money from the Cultural Recovery Fund into our own organisation, which really enabled us to both build some infrastructure, but also to experiment and pilot new ways of working, and to bring in some external advice to help in areas where we really didn't quite know what we were doing. And it's also physically paid for some things like, for example, distributing family activity packs out through food banks. So we've really been able to reach an audience that potentially we don't normally reach, but actually really will have appreciated that service that museums can provide. A lot of those new ways of working have been ways of working digitally. I think we've become masters from potentially being a service that may not have been the most digitally engaged to start off with. We've really become masters of working in digital formats since then. We've engaged with schools, with care homes, with people living at home, with young people through work experience, all of these through Zoom sessions and digital resources. And we created a Stay Connected part of our website, which has all of these online resources that are able for people to use. And we've significantly increased our use of social media, including things like YouTube, where we've doubled our users across the last year. I mean, as well as all of this, our team are also supporting some of the other essential services within the council, including the business grants and the social isolation grants. So there's a lot of work that the team are taking on. I did also want to talk very briefly about the collections. I think one of the important things is that one of the roles that museums have is to make sure that we maintain that long-term perspective, that understanding that what we do is to make sure we are providing a perspective on what's happening today for those that come beyond us, for future generations. And so one of those was creating a pandemic collecting process to enable us to collect a sample of COVID-related objects, and most importantly, I think the stories of the people that give them to us. And I think we've collected some extremely powerful stories, actually, of tragedy and resilience and working together and community focus that I think will be quite powerful for future generations to look back on and learn from potentially our mistakes, but also our successes over this last year. So finally, I then just wanted to talk a little bit about our reopening and our looking ahead process. For us, the recovery is focusing really on marketing that builds confidence again. We know we have safe and interesting museums, but it's making sure that our visitors are feeling reassured by the safety measures we've put in place and feel confident that they are able to return to us again. At the Art Gallery Museum, we currently have an exhibition about Titanic, which has been astonishingly popular. We've been able to attract audiences who haven't previously visited museums, which I think is a great thing to be able to do in post-pandemic times. We've been able to use some of the funding that we've received to reach out to a much wider audience than we have done previously. So we've been able to advertise to people across the urban conurbation of Worcestershire and the Black Country, Birmingham and the Black Country. And as a result, over May and June, we were up to 150% of our normal levels during that time coming to those exhibitions. In order to be able to manage that, which has been a challenge, there's no point in pretending anything otherwise, we've introduced a partial pre-booking session. And I think we're still learning how to do that successfully, but I think that's going to be very useful in the long run to work out how we can move into a sort of a hybrid situation where we both cope with drop-in, but also things that people might want to pre-book for us. Many members may know of the city's Welcome Back Funding Award, which funded this summer a various selection of work across the city. But specifically, as far as the heritage venue goes, we've put together some welcome ambassadors who work specifically to encourage visitors to visit the heritage sites. And I'm hoping that this will, again, enable some of those heritage sites that have found it more difficult to attract their visitors back to be, you know, have visitors encouraged to move towards them or to learn what's worthwhile going to visit. So all in all, I would say we've got some significant learning from this process to take forward, and that was feeding into the planning, both for recovery, but also I would say for longer term development. Against all of this, as Amanda mentioned, we've been having some significant funding brought in for projects within the city, and the museums are included within the Towns Fund planning, and indeed with the updated city plan. So in both cases, we will see longer term developments that I think improve both museums for the future. Does anyone have any questions for me?
No, it's not really a question. I just want to say how impressed I am with your work over the COVID period. It's a brilliant report, and I've been to your exhibitions and they've been so good, and the work you did to the shop and the commandery as well. I think it was really good timing actually, because people going for the first time saw something that looked really modern and sleek. So I just want to congratulate you and your team actually for some great work. Thank you.
Yeah, I also wanted to congratulate you on the report and the staff and volunteers for how they've managed to keep going through this pandemic. And as you said, we've been open more than some very high profile places. I've been to the Titanic exhibition. I went on Monday morning, took my grandson. He's 13, so a 13-year-old boy isn't always very impressed by museums, but he was very impressed by the Titanic. I think the references to the film helped actually, even though the film wasn't historically correct. I think it does sort of make a connection with something that they may have seen, and he went home and watched the film again. But yeah, congratulations to you for this report and to all our staff and volunteers for managing to keep going and to keep the interest and to keep bringing the visitors in, because the cultural side of our history and the cultural side of life through this pandemic has sadly been something that's been a victim of the lockdowns and the restrictions that we've been under. And it's good to see that we've managed to keep going and that we are recovering. So congratulations to everyone involved in this.
Okay, yeah, I'm very sorry I missed your presentation last week because I was otherwise engaged. I'm on the community committee as well. But really my question is, obviously museums do get a lot of school visits, and obviously a school visit to a museum is one of the most effective ways of actually learning and one of the memories you have of your school day are the museums and places that you actually visited. Obviously, we haven't been able to do that so far this year because of COVID restrictions. But do you envisage this particular type of activity increasing from September when children will be able to come back in these sort of groups, and are you sort of doing anything to promote the schools to actually get them back to visiting the museum?
Well, I mean, actually, you are absolutely right. The museum education visits are an incredibly powerful way of learning about your past. Nothing brings it to life better than, you know, experiencing it and touching it and being in the middle of it. But one of the lovely things is that even though throughout 2021 we didn't have a single school visit, our interaction numbers with formal education organisations were almost the same as they were in a normal year. So we were able to do zoomed in visits. We were able to work with in projects, particularly we have a lovely an ongoing project called Suitcase Stories that works with people living with dementia, which we were able to connect with schools, which was absolutely fabulous project where people living with dementia talked about their own reminiscence of their, you know, their younger lives, and then the schools acted this out, and it's some really, really lovely interactions going on there, and indeed something as very, very simple as lending out objects to schools so that they were able to, in times when they weren't able to get out, and actually it was quite tough in the classrooms, they were able to have something interesting to look at and work with. So it's not the same, but we were able to reach out to some extent. We have I'm very pleased to say they have started coming back again. Obviously, we're now into the school holidays, but we've had several school visits before we got to the school holidays. So we've now become quite expert at being able to manage school bubbles on site. Be interesting to see whether we still need to in September or not. And then we have an intensive marketing campaign that will go out at the end of August, which is just when teachers then start to research before they go back. They start to research where it is they might want to visit. We find the easiest way to reach teachers is through Facebook groups, which is, I mean, actually quite a targeted way of reaching them, which is brilliant because it means we can get directly to the right teachers. And we're hoping that that will then bring in a whole series of new visits in the autumn. And we do have quite a sophisticated long-term ambitions to improve the service. One of the ambitions we have for the commandery particularly is to move further from just simply talking about the history curriculum, which is a very important part of what happens, but we really have the story of democracy on our doorsteps there at the commandery, and that's now a key part of Key Stage 3 and Key Stage 4 citizenship curriculum, and so that's a real opportunity for us to become a regional centre for that particular area of the curriculum, which I think there's a real opportunity for us to grasp as we go on, and we're just piloting that in this next upcoming year.
Thank you, Chair. I should declare an interest as a member of the Museums Committee, folks, and I recently joined it. And it's the meeting we've had already has been extremely interesting. And one of the things that strikes me about what everyone has said is how much we all appreciate the innovation and the fact that the pandemic has actually galvanized you into actually getting out there and doing more in all sorts of different ways with a whole range of different people as well. And some of the same, but you know, I think it has galvanized the process. It's been a lot more creative than I actually expected it to be. So, you know, I really like to congratulate you on that, but I also hope that this is our charter year at the Guildhall that we're sitting in, and our mayor over there. I hope you're working with our mayor, you know, on those events, because it's terribly important to those of us who've been mayors before, I suppose, but all of us really as councillors at the heart of democracy and civic life. And I suppose we've always wanted to invite more people into the Guildhall and take part in civic life, haven't we? It'd be great to see them coming in to events of that sort this year. Thank you.
I certainly want to thank Philippa and her staff and her volunteers. I was chairman of the drug committee last year with my county council, and I'm portfolio, and now I'm chairman of the joint committee with the position on this committee. And I just want to really do thank them, and really, I think it's such positive ways that we've come so far, and I hadn't realised, but we're the 6th oldest museum in the country, which I think is something to be proud of, and obviously it's half degree castle as well, so thank you very much. Right, so we note this so now we come to the Future High Street Fund. Now, this committee approves the property enhancement scheme in the terms set out in this report, and they delegate authority to the managing director, corporate director of finance and resources, in consultation with myself, the chair, and Joe as the vice chair of this committee, to finalise and implement the scheme. Now, I think, unless you're minded otherwise, I think perhaps Joe and myself will perhaps lead on this, and please accept that I think it's a fantastic way of it's Angel Street. It's we know that it's the urban, it's a regeneration of that street, and I think it's a good way. So, Joe?
Well, it's to encourage owners and in some cases tenants to improve the properties in this part of the city, because I think that northern part of the city, we would all agree, is desperately in need of some sort of renovation, some sort of improvement. We've got a beautiful riverside. We've got a lovely cathedral square, and then you come to the cross, and then unfortunately there are some lovely places there. I mean, I'm not knocking places like the Hot Market and some lovely premises, but it is desperately in need of renovation. And this is encouraging owners to spend some money to make their properties look better, to improve the look of our city, and also to increase things like floor space, so that empty places above the shops can be used, can be utilised, and I think it's a great scheme. I think 600,000 altogether, and owners can bid for up to 30,000 or 75% of the cost of the works. And so hopefully some of the owners of those properties which are badly in need of renovation will take advantage of this scheme and use the money to improve their properties and to improve our city and the look of our city. I think it's a great scheme.
Thank you, Chair. Just to echo Joe's comments, absolutely, I think this is an excellent scheme, because what it does is it engages those owners, the private sector, in terms of the process, and I look forward to obviously people coming forward, shop owners, premise owners coming forward, because we do want to see that invested in. My question, I suppose, not for answering today, but is just to be mindful that there are some inflationary pressures in terms of the building sector, particularly materials and supply of labour, and also timelines for people who would be seeking to regenerate maybe a shop or another dwelling in there might be more elongated, because people are reporting obviously longer timescales to get things done. So in terms of deploying this grant, I think we just be mindful of the effects of inflation and timescales to make sure people aren't they're able to take advantage of this. And obviously we need to do it within timescales of government, but we just need to think about how we build that in terms of what conditions we put and making sure that we can actually enable those improvements that Joe talks about and we all wish to see, I'm sure, around the table come forward. The points have been made about that area of the city, and we've seen vast improvements in many areas of the city, but I think we all recognise that that's an area that will benefit heavily from the investment. But I'm really pleased to see us engaging with those private sector owners, because they're also key to bringing forward the regeneration we want to see.
Proposed £30,000 or 75% of the costs. £30,000 was sort of considered to be a right amount of money, rather than a sort of maybe 5, 10, 15,000, because it was made to feel better.
Without labouring the point, I suppose it's in some parts of the sector we've seen cost inflations of maybe 10+%, and in other parts of raw materials like timber, people have been telling me that they've doubled processed timber in costs in a year in terms of some requirements. So when you're dealing with those kind of cost inflations, I think we've just got to be mindful that we want people to invest. We've got to make sure there's enough of incentive there that actually the money will do the job we want, because it's about quality. We also want to make sure it's driving quality in our city centre. We're mindful of the historic core, and we're mindful that we want to have economic objectives. So I just think to be mindful as we go through this, that's actually going to do the job we want.
I would just add and agree there that we will have an element of control, because the people doing these renovations will be approved by us, and they will be approved to a standard. So it's not going to be, dare I say, a botched job. It's going to be something that's reputable, that will stand the test of time, will look good, and will fit in with the area and the heritage of the area. And I think that is an important element of it, that we have, we maintain an element of control there.
Yeah, just to understand 10.5, the figure is £30,000 or £75,000. £30,000 is effectively the cap. So is that right? So effectively you get 75% of what of the cost of your project in terms of this, and obviously and that can reach up to £30,000, and that's the upper limit an individual one will get. Is that correct? Am I understanding that interpretation of it?
Proposed as £30,000, but it all depends on the number of things, the number of items or something like that. So and again, we can just clarify that with officers.
I would think that if the total renovation was 30,000, you're not going to get the whole 30,000. You would only get 75% of that. But if it was more expensive than that, then you could get up to 30,000. That 30,000 might only be 50%, but you won't get more than 30,000.
We just need to clarify with the officers. So, James.
Thanks very much. I'd like to echo the points that Simon's made, Joe's made. We've made a major investment in that part of the city, acquiring properties, and generally we've got some serious ambitions for that part of the city, and that's amazing and good. This, in a sense, gives us that opportunity to not leave, to not make that uplift so fragmentary. We can actually, really build something positive into the area, and work with owners and to some extent tenants to actually, make those properties, actually part of a really rejuvenated area. So overall, I'm totally in favour of it, with all the caveats that others have introduced.
Just on the off chance that any of the buildings are Worcester Municipal Charities buildings, I need to declare a potential interest. I'm all for this. I think it's a great incentive for property owners to invest in their buildings and to improve the fabric of the whole area. So I think it's a really good way forward.
Any other questions? So, yes.
Hopefully the scheme, if adopted, will get well used and the funds will mean an improvement in the area. But what happens to those property owners who choose not to take advantage of the scheme and their properties still look bad and bring the rest of the street down? What would we do then?
We need to, we need to find out with the officers exactly what the feeling is, and we can maybe do things like, we can't not do it. Yeah. Hello, Jane, Karen, sorry.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, my question is a little bit like that one. It's obviously in that area we do have some really good quality buildings as well. So will there be advice from officers as to the kind of things that would be acceptable? And in fact, would it be that we could go to some of the building owners and prioritise some buildings that look particularly bad and could particularly benefit from the scheme?
Three is examples of the type of work that will be carried out or that sort of thing. So I think that is actually in the report as to whether it's external elevations, roofs, and things like that. So I think it's actually in the report, but also again, officers will be able to develop it as well.
Yeah, I don't really mean that, sorry. What I mean is that when you've got a building that is of almost listable quality or could have it, it's not just like a maintenance thing, it's building back some quality into the buildings. So whether we've got that, obviously I know that we've had a loss of an officer recently, so we've got that capacity or that expertise.
We have to, the conservation officer and that sort of thing will be involved as well.
That's what I mean.
Yes,
yes.
Automatically. Right. So, anything else? Right. Well, thank you very much, and thank you very much. Yes. Fun. And oh yes, do we just approve this? Yeah. That's it. Thank you. Thank you.